I think we had a very nice conversation with a few of you, or at least it was nice for me. I don't know how interesting you found a little bit of discussion about what genomics and genetics is. It's a very vast field, but we will focus entirely today on, or at least I'll try to focus entirely on the clinical genetics part of it, which is about diseases which are caused by mutations or changes in genes, essentially. Now, perhaps every disease that you can think of has a genetic component, but we're not talking about diseases which are multifactorial. We're talking about diseases which are, if you have a mutation, if you have a genetic change, then it's very highly likely that that person will develop that disease. So the challenge in the field as such, which was much bigger challenge previously, but still persists, is that so we have about 6 billion nucleotides in every cell of our body, which make up the entire DNA. And you're actually looking for that one single genetic change, which is responsible for a person's clinical presentation. So that in itself is a data challenge at the heart of it, where from a huge amount of data, you really need to pick that needle from the haystack as to which is driving the clinical phenotype or clinical condition that we're concerned about. So diagnosis in itself is a data challenge. Beyond diagnosis, in terms of the next step would be to understand how that genetic change is causing the disease. That is also to some extent a data challenge, because there are so many different permutations, combinations that one can hypothesize that how a particular genetic change would be causing a disease. And then there are a number of different modalities that are coming up and that have been evaluated previously as well. And whether those could be applied to perhaps treat some of these conditions as well, that's also a data challenge. So broadly speaking, I mean, data is everything and everything is data, right? So genomics is no exception, but largely I would say it is in the medical field one of the specialities where data really is at the heart, at the center of the work that we do.
So now, I mean, given that we work on AI and the kind of work that you do, which is like 20 years, 25 years of, research, and doctors typically, I think they look at so many parameters. And nowadays they're talking about AI passing medical exams, and a lot of AI looking at X-rays. And so, I mean, what are your views on how AI is going to really help doctors? Some people say it will replace doctors. We don't subscribe to that view at all. But in general, how do you see this whole thing of AI coming in? I mean, how is it really? But what is the medical fraternity, thinking about it? And maybe particular to UK, particular to NHS, any views on that?
Sure, I think any AI or not even a very AI program would be better at passing exams than me. So that's really not a challenge. The bar is quite low there, actually, passing exams. But so AI and medicine they're big when they're big circles, right? So the Venn diagrams are pretty big. So I'll try and focus on what I know. So if I again come back to clinical genetics, so where we started was the challenge of extracting the meaningful data from a vast data set, essentially. So the way traditionally it is done is that you're going through each and every genetic change. You're obviously filtering and doing all that manually. And then you see a genetic change and you try to work out, predict what effect it might have. So there's a lot of manual input that is required in that. But it is pretty clear that it's already happening and it will be very much mainstream, that a lot of this filtering of data, matching parameters, predicting what the effects would be, that's all going to be AI driven. And of course, there will be human oversight and human input into that at the end of the day. But that perhaps means that one of the bottlenecks is being able to analyze large number of patients and huge data sets from each of those patients. So that efficiency we are hoping that AI is going to bring forth. So that's really, which is probably already happening. It's really a matter of adoption rather than innovation. Innovation will keep on happening, incremental innovation will keep on happening, but it's the adoption which is perhaps a bit more of a challenge, because systems are pretty much built in. The quality assurances are very much built in, and they're all built around human beings. So changing those systems, adopting those systems is perhaps an equal challenge in terms of actually the innovation. So that's one. But I'm hoping that going forward in future, this is going to be able to tell us about disease mechanisms, treatments, and that perhaps is more around research rather than clinical applications directly. But in our field, it is also interwoven, interlinked, that sometimes it's very difficult to say this is clinical practice or this is research. So perhaps in brief, that is what my view is about genomics. And of course, there are lots of success stories around image reading in radiology, for example, is something which most of you would have heard of, would be aware of, and that's already been adopted. So I guess there are models of adoption which are already there. We just need to perhaps replicate them, but it's already happening.
Two questions. One, as in, are the doctors equipped to look at, or hospitals equipped to look at such large volumes of data? Obviously, there's one part that's understanding the statistics around it. Two, do you know of any anomaly detection? If I understand, this is close to an anomaly detection model. That's like a GenAI based anomaly detection model that has specifically been trained for such work.
There are lots of companies who have developed these anomaly detection models, essentially using sort of reference genome as your basis, and then looking for variants. So, for example, if I sequence your genome, I'll find a few million variants from what we call a reference genome, which doesn't really exist anywhere, but it's a derived reference genome, which is from a set of human beings who were sequenced as part of the Human Genome Project. So it's not, there is no perfect human genome anywhere in the world, of course. So the challenge really there is, out of those 1,000 variants, you have a disease and we need to work out which variant. So yes, those models exist. They are already being used. For example, in our lab, we're currently using or trialing a system from a company called Illumina, which some of you might have come across. So they are one of the giants in sequencing platforms, so genome sequencing or genetic sequencing platforms. So that is something that we're using, but there are lots of other algorithms out there as well. Each one claims that they perform better. They perhaps perform better in certain scenarios than other scenarios. And the sequencing itself is not just a single technology. So there are lots of different technologies, chemistries that can be used for sequencing, and what chemistry you use will determine your quality and your output, etc. And all of that also has an influence on your anomaly detection models as well. So yeah, there are lots of players and there are lots of algorithms, and they're all vying for space currently, I would say.
So basically not from the genome itself, but the kind of projects that we have done with you, right? They're more into one, digitizing the data, and then being able to analyze hopefully at some stage, right? So my question is, one, where are we in terms of all the clinical data, the doctor's conversations, the pedigree charts that you're making, right? I'm sure there are multiple things which are still pending to be digitized. And then overall, because these are rare genetic diseases, right? It's hard to get the data. It can't be that all of it is there in UK, right? You need to collaborate with maybe different centers across the world, and data privacy and security and everything. I mean, even the platforms that we are trying to build, that is a big concern, right? So the question is two parts. One is just this digitization and how much of that is happening, needs to happen. And then overall, for things where this data is not in abundance, you need to go out, collect more and more. How is that collaboration being set up, or is it being set up right now?
So, I mean, this is a big challenge, and perhaps some of it is happening, but a lot more can be done, needs to be done. Often, there are also there are regulatory challenges, right? So even within, let's say, if I have a patient in my clinic, even getting their complete data is a challenge for me, because they might have seen someone at a different hospital in the same region, but not all that data is shared within the same NHS system, for example, in the UK currently. So it is a challenge. Perhaps it's more of a regulatory and mindset issue. I think a lot of people, everyone recognizes really that this needs to be overcome. But data privacy issues are just so difficult to solve. Even within the NHS system, there are plans so that the electronic data from patients can be shared more easily. Previously, it has been tried. It's not a new concept. It's been tried for decades. It just never succeeded, or has not succeeded as much as it should. So it's a challenge, and I really don't have a clear view as to what will happen. But there is a major push around that. So when you extend that internationally, that's almost really impossible. And there are data silos in the world. So there are countries from where it's just illegal to take out data. So I'm not very hopeful that we'll ever achieve an international collaboration, international agreement for these things, but at least region-wise, country-wise, this should be possible. So that's really where we're at. So even from India, actually, it's quite difficult to take out a DNA sample just from India for research, which is understandable. But I'm just sort of saying the regulatory environment in which we exist is perhaps a decade or so behind where the science and the current requirements are.
So even let us say, if you're able to collect data from different countries, different ethnicities, different regions, and especially about genetics, I mean, is it that, that same data would be useful, or do you really need to account for those differences, or by and large, the whole idea that all human beings are equal in terms of everything, is that true? I mean, genetically, you said yesterday that even banana shares 60% DNA with us, a banana, and a chimpanzee around 98-99%. So what about human beings? Do they really share? To what level of genes do they share?
So most of the rare disease genetics research has been done in Western advanced economies, and bulk of patients are from white European Caucasian ancestry. And there is a major realization in the field that it is really important for us to understand, go beyond, and not just be focused on for our conclusions to be drawn from just single ancestry. I think things are improving quite a lot. There is much more research and clinical work that's happening across the world in this field. But it is there are certain conditions which are much more prevalent in certain ethnicities. So one could hypothesize that there should be lots of shared manifestations irrespective of ethnicities, but it would not be surprising for that some diseases the manifestations would be different. And of course, the frequency of individual diseases differ from ethnicity to ethnicity. So if there are diseases which are more common in India, it's probably in the interest of Indian researchers, Indian government, Indian population, Indian doctors to focus more on research of that. You would not probably expect other countries where the diseases are less common for them to focus on that. It's probably our responsibility in that sense.
So see, there was obviously these days a lot of multidisciplinary, multifunctional kind of teams are being formed. So I remember there was a time when most of the finance world was controlled by maybe accountants, right? Because they understood the language of finance. And now it's all engineers, at least all the high frequency trading, everything is being done by engineers. I see that medicine again seems to be to be going the engineering way. There is obviously a lot of requirement for data storage, and I'm not speaking about, let's say, just the auxiliary storage. Do you foresee a time when some of these people could be contributing meaningfully towards medicine as in healthcare? And do you see a future where engineers take over healthcare as well?
I think you guys are already doing that, so there's no question about it. And I'm not being flippant. It is correct, but it has to be multidisciplinary, right? So absolutely that's correct. In fact, in my own team, we've got people from mathematics background. There are lots of bioinformaticians. Essentially, bioinformaticians are data scientists to some extent, really, in the context of biology. So without a doubt, and I think you guys bring skills that we don't have. We can just really probably understand what you can do, but we cannot do what you can do. So I think you guys actually have a really important role in sort of taking us to the next level.